Good morning, everyone. We're continuing here in the words of the Beis Halevi. We're in the 6th chapter. We're going to conclude the 6th chapter today. My apologies for the choppy performance the last few weeks. It's the summertime, Baruch Hashem. There's a lot going on. The schedule is not exactly as it usually is. We try to learn as much as we possibly can this summer. The Beis Halevi is speaking about the idea that asina goremes averis chamur asina, hatred that you have inside your heart, leads to many other serious transgressions, and we finish off by saying could even lead up to ritzicha, to murder. And even if you don't become a ritzeach, a murderer itself, but the shchita, the slaughtering that you do to another person in their emotional and their spiritual world, their self-confidence and the like, as a result of the sina that you have towards them, the way in which you treat them, the way that you talk to them, the way you act around them, the kind of lashon hara that you will speak behind their back and possibly even ruin their reputation, that's also a form of ritzicha. As we know, the Gemara tells us that it's better to throw yourself into a kivshan eish, into a fiery furnace, rather than to be malbin p'nei chaveru berabim, than to embarrass a person publicly. Which means that if you are, because of your hatred, embarrassing others and shaming others and the like, you're better off throwing yourself into a fiery furnace and letting yourself die, because ein lo chelik l'olam haba, there's no portion that will be awaiting you in the world to come. The sina, hatred itself, which often leads to a person saying nasty things that can cause great embarrassment to them, that is a form and a precursor of ritzicha, of murder, and therefore you must be very careful. And he writes over here in the final words of this chapter, Uba Meseches Makos, we have a tractate in Shas called Makos, Perek Beis Amin, in the 2nd chapter over there it says, Saine, someone who hates his fellow, Eino Gaila, does not go into gullus, does not go into exile. Now, what is this referring to? There is a very interesting halacha that the Torah speaks about and the Gemara expounds upon, and that is that if, by mistake, I kill somebody else, it was what we call b'shoigig, it was inadvertent, it was not intentional, and I kill that person, and the Gemara goes through different ways in which it can happen, but it's clear that it's shoigig, that it's inadvertent. The halacha is that I must go, the punishment is that I go to a place called the Ere Miklat, it's called Golas, called exile, and I might end up spending many years and decades there until the Kohen Gadol is going to perish and going to die. I'm locked up in this city of refuge. It protects me in a certain way, but it's also a kapara, an atonement process, and that's where I'm going to be. However, the Gemara says like this: if you ended up killing somebody and it looked like it was b'shoigig, it looked like it was by mistake and inadvertent, however, we know that you're a saina, you actually hate that person that you killed, Eina Gaila, you cannot get the punishment of Gullus, you will not go in to the exile, you will not go into the city of refuge. Why? Because we assess the situation and we have to assume that because of your hatred of this person, it brought you to that place of ritzicha, of killing them, even though that it looked like it was by mistake. We assume that behind the scenes, in the workings of your mind and your heart, you really intentionally ended up killing this person, and therefore you're going to have to be tried not as an inadvertent killer, but really as someone that killed purposely over here, and it's going to be a completely different judgment and punishment that is going to come about. So what do you see? Hatred that is brooding inside the heart of a person is so bad and it's so lethal that even when it looks like that which you are doing in the world of ritzicha, of killing, is by mistake, we know better, says the Torah. The Torah looks deeper inside of your heart and your mind and your nefesh and your soul, and it sees that really your hatred is what motivates you to be careless in this situation and bring about a murder with your very own hands. Now the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, what is considered to be the definition of an enemy? How do you define your enemy in this world? And the Gemara says it's talking about someone who out of anger or kas or sina, anger or hatred, has not spoken to his friend for 3 days. So that makes you into an enemy. If you don't speak to someone for 3 days, purposely because you are angry or you hate them, you are their sainik, you are their enemy that is against them. Just, Rabbi, I think about this for a moment. How many times do husbands and wives get in fights with each other? And for 3 days, sometimes even more, they don't talk to each other. Says the Gemara, that means you're enemies with one another. How many times do parents and children sometimes get in arguments and fights and divisive interaction with each other, and they don't talk to each other? So not only are you a saint, not only are you someone that hates each other, you're an enemy with one another. And so on and so forth with friends and with community members and with people that you come in contact with and people that you go to school with. If somebody does something that upsets you and aggravates you, and as a result of that, your anger and your hatred takes over and you refuse to talk to that person for only 3 days, you're considered to be an enemy. You want to be an enemy of another Jew? You have a title in Shemayim in the heavens that that's the enemy of Pliny. That's the enemy of this guy, of his wife. That's the enemy of his children. That's the enemy of his father. That's the enemy of the person he sits next to in shul. You want that title in heaven? Nobody wants to have that title. And yet, we make this mistake constantly, like the HaChaim himself points out. Constantly we get into little arguments and tiffs with other people. And it motivates us. It spurs on this kas, the anger and the sin and the hatred. And we become enemies with one another. And furthermore, says the HaChaim, there's one other thing you have to be very careful about. And that is that if you do not speak to somebody else, you won't feel, I'm not going to talk to that person. My wife, who does she think of? Husband, who is it? If you're not going to speak to them, so not only are you a Satan, not only are you a person who's bearing hatred, not only are you a person who is an enemy, but every single moment that you refuse to speak to this person, you're transgressing the prohibition in the Torah of Leisisnes achicha bivavecha. You're not allowed to hate your brother in your heart. So you are in bad shape if you are a spiteful person. If you are a person who gets angry and hates other people and then refuses to talk to them and treats them like a shmata, like garbage on the ground, you would treat better than that. So then you are transgressing the prohibition of hating your brother in your heart every single moment. Let us rescue ourselves and our relationships. Let us rescue our dignity and the dignity of the other Tselem Elokim, the other Jews who are created in God's image that are around us. Wipe out the sin of the hatred from your hearts, from our hearts. Look upon them favorably, judge them, l'chav zechus, on the side of good. Find the good that is inside of them. Don't look at the bad and the frustration and what they did wrong to you. Try to see what they've done right, either for you or for others. And in that way, your heart will be flowing with AHAVAS. YISRAEL, the love of another Jew, will eradicate the sin of the hatred of another Jew. And in that way, will be zeicher to great portions in the world to come. And simcha, nachas, bracha, menuchas hanefesh, and true friendship and love here in this world. Have a wonderful day.